Buffering. Buffering. This is the modern day peeler. Buffering. Buffering.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order, starting with the roll call. Nicole? Here. Joe?
Here.
John?
Here.
I'm here as well. So we have quorum. Nicole, has this meeting been properly noticed?
It has.
And tonight, could you also read our equity and mission statements?
I'd love to. Our equity statement reads, each student has access to the resources and educational rigor they need at the right moment in their education, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, ability, language, family background, or family income.
With 100 and other local school districts. So I want to say thank you to the representation from the 100 Black men of Dane County for their partnership in those areas. And we really want to encourage anyone that may be in need of supplies to let us know. We will also have them on site at all of our schools, and just know that those resources are there. Secondly, in the picture for me is on my top left, but I'm not sure where it is for you. We were able to, I had the honor of saying a few words of congratulations to the class of 1972 in their 50th year reunion, and that took place at Wisconsin brewery over on American Way or American Parkway, something like that. And just, just the atmosphere and that the feeling of pride to be able to help this alumni group understand that the legacy that they created will stand strong, and the expectation of excellence in education will go on. The tradition they have set before us was a great opportunity to just kind of talk and understand education and how things have changed, and sometimes how things have changed is stayed the same. We looked at some of the pictures that we changed a lot demographically, and I think appropriate so, but we also saw some straight desks and not some things haven't changed in that area. So I think there's an opportunity for us to think about education differently as we continue to grow. So just definitely want to give out a shout out to the class of 1972, and they had a wonderful time. I think that's just a snapshot of the, they can get after it. They had a good time in there. So I pause if there's any questions on those two events from the board.
Great updates, though. It's great to hear all the good parts going on.
All right, with that, we want to transition over to our safety and security update to the Board of Education to the community. We understand that while we offer a world-class education in academics, we are as responsible for a safe environment for all of our staff and students. And we want to talk about our strong partnership with our community, especially the Verona Police Department and the Fitchburg Police Department, as well as the great leadership of our Director of Safety and Security, Mr. Corey Saffold, and the team that works to keep our students safe every day. So we will talk about our safety protocols and present those to the community. So our community understands that we are and will be prepared for the return of our students, and we will have a safe environment when our doors open. So I'll turn it over to Chet and Corey and just hand you the floor.
Good evening to the board. It's good to see everybody.
Good to see you both.
At some point when I know we have a packed agenda, you'll have to have Dr. Clarity tell the story about being a 50th wedding anniversary crasher at the 50th class reunion, where he was almost an impromptu guest speaker. So we'll save that for another day.
What are the odds that there were two 50th events in the same place, and they had on shirts that said 50? So my context clue said, go back up a conversation. All right. With
that being said, it's great to see everybody this evening. Excited to have Corey here tonight to present with me on certainly a safe and productive start to the school year. I did want to continue to ground the board and the community on our results policies. And we have a specific policy around maintaining a learning environment that's safe, respectful, and conducive for learning. Many of the things that I help support district-wide, I think fall under this umbrella. And Corey's work's a piece of that. I think having students well-fed and in a temperate environment and a place that they feel like they're safe when they come to school every day, all fits underneath this idea of OE10. So I wanted to make sure that we recognize that tonight. There's definitely a results policy tied to Corey's incredibly important work. Outcomes for tonight, and then I am going to turn things over to Corey. We're here to review local and national issues related to safe and secure schools. In fact, we're going to do a little replay of what some of the things that popped up last year that Corey and his team helped support school get through. When you think about it, even a place like our own high school, Pam and Corey on a daily basis are in charge of running a decent sized city full of adolescents on a daily basis. And when you actually step back to think about that, that's an immense responsibility. And we are super lucky to have Corey on our team to take care of running that safe city on a daily basis. And Corey's team helps support our entire school district every day. We're going to discuss our ongoing partnerships with our first responders. We're going to review and discuss some of the systems and protocols we have in place and have refined for this upcoming school year. Corey's going to give just a brief update on our safety and security assistance, and then finish up with just review of the ongoing work that we have taking place district-wide. So with that, I am super honored to have Corey tonight to discuss what we've got going on regarding safety and security with our community and the board. We don't really have too many spots in the presentation for questions. Corey will review these materials. Do not hesitate if you've got questions along the way. Corey and I are certainly here to answer them. And then we did leave a slide at the end to answer questions if folks have them. Corey, I'll turn it over to you. It's good to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good.
To see
All
you.
good? It's been a while since I've been before the board, so it's good to see you all. Let me give you a bit of background about myself for those that haven't met me yet. I started off as a school security assistant at Madison West High School. I did that for about 2 years, and the reason I applied for that because I needed work-related experience to be a police officer. While I was at Madison West High School, I joined the Black Student Union, and I traveled with the Black Student Union on historical Black colleges and university tours. I enjoyed it immensely, so much so that I became a police officer. I continued to go on these tours with the students from West High School. Eventually, I became a school resource officer. Went back to West High School as a school resource officer and continued to volunteer with the Black Student Union. Where I did the HBCU tour for about 9 years straight as a police officer, traveling with these students all across the country. The students affectionately knew me as Officer Corey, is what they called me. So yeah, it was at West High School that I began to develop my philosophy on policing the school, right? What that should look like. And so while I was there, I created a program called Cops versus High School All-Stars basketball game. It was a fundraiser to raise funds for the HBCU tour. It was quite an interesting game in that there was a young group of all-star players from around the city playing a bunch of older cops, and so you can imagine how that turned out. What was more interesting about that is that our first game was right after the Tony Robinson shooting, if you can remember that. And so I was in a pretty peculiar spot, right, of having to explain to students who looked up to me as a mentor the tragic incident, and then having a co-worker who was involved in it. And what I mainly can remember from that is that the students felt heard, they felt cared for in that moment. They appreciated my being vulnerable and being transparent. And that left us even closer in our relationship and in our bonds. And so we continued with that particular game because it was for a good cause, right? And so we didn't want to stop for that. But that's an example of some of the more powerful moments I had in that school. And as I began to develop this philosophy on policing in school and how that should look and whether it could work or what situation could it work or could not work, I began to speak on panels and do articles on this particular topic. And that's how I came to Verona. Actually, Verona got wind of this and they heard of me and said, "Hey, would you consider coming over here?" I never thought that I'd be in this position, but I thought, hey, why not? I give it a try, and I come over, and it's one of the best decisions that I've made. While at Verona, one of the things that stands out to me that I did right away at Verona is reducing the police costs, police responses to our high school by 93%. And so what that means is like those big calls, those batteries, those disturbances, those calls where police come lights and sirens, right? Before my arrival, that was happening pretty frequently. And we were able to put some systems in place. There was some protocols that I saw that were needed. And after we implemented that, there was a sharp reduction in those calls. Some of you might have been on the school board and can remember that. Also, while at Verona, Governor Evers appointed me to the Youth System Board of Regents. And so in 2020 to 2022, I served on the Capital Budget and Planning Committee, the Education Committee, and the Student Appeal and Disciplinary Committee. And each committee had its own, particular area that I enjoyed. The Capital Budget and Planning Committee, I just enjoyed approving $1 billion projects. You know, it wasn't really any rhyme or reason to it. I just like, okay, this is some money I probably would never see, but hey, at least I can approve it for the education of others, right? The education committee was a committee I was really passionate about, and I was really driving home access to education, all of its forms, scholarships, broadening online programming, and non-traditional forms like night classes or Odyssey Project in any way that we could increase access to education is really what I was aiming for. And our Student Appeal and Disciplinary Committee, it was during a time when Trump administration had, made a lot of changes, whether you agree or disagree with those changes. I chaired that committee, so I was tasked with really making the decision for a lot of the respondents who were appealing, not being able to come to the university anymore. So I say all that to say that I bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the Verona Area School District that, I'm certain is really helping the decision making in my current role. So what I'm going to talk to you about now is I want to do just a quick review of the 2021-2022 school year. All right, and so we had some key incidents that came up that all ended very well, and I just want to talk about those real quick. So one, the one titled social media. There was an incident where a student posted on their personal Snapchat that they were looking forward to, the exact quote was, I can't wait to pick this up, right? And it was an image of an assault rifle, style rifle. So we later learned through investigating that it was an airsoft rifle, and did a thorough investigation and determined that there was no threat, but it was the process to getting to that, because this student posted this on their Snapchat page. Well, we also had this other page up called the Verona Area High School Confessions page. This page was a thorn. You may have heard about this page. It was a thorn on our side for quite some time. But they also screenshot that and they put it on the confessions page, right? And that's when everything hit the fan. That's when our tip line was blowing up. And it kind of was like the telephone game where each story got drastic, but it was, further from the truth. Is there somebody going to shoot up the school? Is there somebody going to do this? Oh, I heard that there's going to be, all of these things. And I guess as I looked at it, the one bright side to this was like, I know our tip line works, it is active, and I know our students use it and they go to it and it is effective. So that, that was a good thing from it. But we really spent a lot of time really chasing that, what we determined to not actually be a viable threat. And we involved Verona Police Department. We actually set up a command post right downstairs in the high school office that involved the Verona Police Department, superintendents, myself, high school administration, where you really saw just collaboration, on a different level of really trying to problem solve a problem while providing a communication to the community that our school is safe. So that was just one issue that stood out to me. Another issue was splatter guns. I don't know if you've heard about this trend. Like many other TikTok trends, a problem. And it was basically students were coming to school with these facsimile guns that shot these water projectiles, right? Essentially, if used properly, it could be a lot of fun. However, there is no fun for them when they're brought to school. And that was the problem that we were facing, because students were using their vehicles to drive erratically and, were just, using them on school buses. So it became a huge problem. And, the one particular incident involving splatter guns that stands out to me is at the track meet, and it was nighttime. Students were wanting to play with their splatter guns, and obviously at night you can't recognize that it's a toy weapon. And different passerby who was leaving the track meet saw this and reported, student or someone has an assault rifle. That's what they saw. That's what they believed, because, in the shadows in that night, that's what it was. So Verona came, they responded, they did a high risk traffic stop. And if you don't know what that is, it's a traffic stop where police have their guns drawn, they're giving commands, they order you out of the car. So it was just a reminder to the danger of these guns. And this one was short lived, right? There was like kind of the spike in splatter guns, and then we dealt with it, and then we kind of did not hear about it anymore. And so, I'm pretty sure we'll keep it like that. At Country View, we had a gas leak one morning. What was interesting and stands out about this for me is that you often plan for emergencies, right? And for some reason, when we plan for emergencies, we always plan on them. In my mind, you picture them happening at a certain time. They're gonna happen at 2 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and we're gonna be ready. What was interesting about Country View is that it happened before school. It happened in the morning when everybody was on their way to school. So, you may not have had your radio yet. Folks still driving to school. Their bus is still coming to school. So how do you like come together and navigate, right, and problem solve that? But we did just that, right? We came together, and it's interesting because right before that, we had just started using an app called Crisis Go. And this app is an emergency notification app. I pull the app out and I push the evacuation button, a loud siren will sound to a group of people. They'll get it on their phone, it cuts through everything, and then they know what they need to do after that. And that was our first time actually using that app in a situation, and it worked out. And we were able to set up a mini command post at Sugar Creek as Todd was ready to respond, and his staff got all the kids in, and Badger Bus was able to pivot on a dime, and we set up some Zoom meetings. We're able to get through, what was particularly a major event. Safety DPD was involved in helping to redirect kids who were walking to school. So again, you saw an effort from everybody involved. Another incident that stands out is the amount of protests that we've had, social unrest. One in particular, there was an incident at East High School where students were protesting how a sexual assault there was handled, right? But they called for other schools to join them in protests and to walk out. That was different for us because 2 of our schools decided to participate, and so we had to manage these walkouts from Savannah Oaks and from the high school, which was different. So we had staff at Savannah Oaks, we had a drone up at the high school monitoring the crowd. But what stood out about that one is that the passion, and not just the passion, but the hurt and the pain that you could see on the students' faces. Clearly, they had gone through some personal things dealing with sexual assault as well. But our staff and the way they were able to respond and support them, give them a voice, letting them vent, but then offering them support, I thought was phenomenal. That was another incident that stood out to me. The last incident that stood out, most people probably heard of, was the firearm incident that we had on campus that I physically removed from another student. Obviously, that was that was a major incident. The one thing I can say about that incident is that I am extremely happy and extremely grateful that that incident worked out in the way that it did. The more I look back at the incident, I can't think of, you always want to think about continuous improvement, right? Could I have done this? Could I have done that? Or what could each time I think back at that incident and think about maybe what I should have done differently or not done, or my team, I come back to the place of we did everything right. That no one got hurt. That student didn't get hurt. I didn't get hurt. The police didn't, no community member got hurt. And so I'm just extremely grateful for that. But basically, a security assistant, because of her relationship with students, interacting with students like normally does, Diamond Howard, really want to commend her and her rapport with students, but also her skill, her keen awareness to recognize something was off. Just notice from communicating with the students, kind of playing around with him, that something was off about his backpack, about his behavior and his response to that. And from there, she told me we were able to respond and remove the loaded firearm from the student. So though that's just kind of a review, what happened last year. So what we're going to focus on in moving forward is we'll talk through Robb Elementary a little bit. I do study and read all the after action reports of these shootings in an effort to make sure we are, doing best practices and have the latest and the greatest to keep our students safe. We'll talk about the onboarding of our new staff and our students, how we get them prepared, and just the refreshers that we do for our remaining staff and students. So I like to think of safety and security, to the next slide, in layers. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to do that. My bad. So I think of it kind of like in these three layers of security, right? Our first responders, partnerships, our incident response protocols, and then continuous improvement. And for this example, the continuous improvement is safety measures that we've been able to determine as a result of Robb Elementary. But it's those layers that keep our schools safe. So starting with our first responder partners. So we've created a group called Emergency Preparedness and Violence Prevention Work Group. This group consists of the Verona Police Department, the Fitchburg Police Department, our area field agents for the FBI, Mark Givens, the Secret Service, Verona EMS, the Verona Fire Department, and the Fitchburg Fire Department. The good thing about this group is that each of these members brings a unique skill to the group. A lot of our firefighters are on the Dane County Emergency Management Team, and so they're constantly receiving the latest and greatest training in emergency preparedness and responses. So the purpose of this group is to discuss best practices for preparing for and responding to an active threat, right? That's one of the main things that we discuss. So best practices can look like a number of different things. One day we could focus on reunification. What does that look like? What does communication look like? One day it can be making sure our language is the same, making sure Fitchburg doesn't call something in the code red and Verona calls that same thing in code blue. It's just making sure that we're all on the same page and saying the same language. We coordinate on scenario-based training for law enforcement. We ensure that first responders are on the same page. We also asking them to frequently check exterior doors to our schools, which I'll talk more about that later. That's something that came up from Robb Elementary. And we're laying out what's called a grid mapping program. It's a grant that we received from the state to develop these grid maps that make it faster for our first responders to respond to our schools in case of an emergency. Our grant, I just received communication for them, is likely going to get approved, and hopefully we can start that process in October to develop that grid mapping. This will be a digital map that would go on the computers of all the first responders so they can get to our schools faster, and then just understand and know the layout of our school in case of an emergency. And also just for open lines of communication and continue to build trust with our first responders. This group is going to be a key group in doing tabletops and understanding all the layouts for our buildings. And we just want to make sure that we have this partnership developed, to better enhance the safety of our schools. The next layer is our incident response protocols. These are protocols that we've already and always had in place. The incident response protocols are our building secure or lockdown, our classroom hold, and our active threat options. And just real quick in a nutshell, building secure are those situations when we need to obviously secure the exterior of the building. Bring everybody in, secure the exterior of the building. Business can go on as usual during that time. An example of that, and we've had this actually happen, I believe the subway was being robbed. And police called and said, hey, we got subways was robbed. We haven't caught the intruder yet. And this was a real situation. We need you to, they use the word lockdown, I use the word building secure. And we secured the building and business as usual inside, but just keep everything exterior door locked. Classroom hold is another level of security. And that usually happens if there's a disturbance within the building. A lot of times we use this most times for medical emergencies, actually, where a staff member or a student is having a medical emergency and we need to get first responders in, but want to avoid the crowd, we'll go into a classroom hold so we can clear the hallways for them and get them right in. And then we have our active threat options. Our active threat options just actively walks you through what to do when there's a case of death or grave bodily harm, right? And that's basically our evacuate, if you need to barricade, if you need to lock down, or if you need to counter. And these are things that we we train our staff on every year. And so what we're doing this year, based on the feedback from our students, is we're doing that training at the beginning of the year, right? It used to be we put a lot of emphasis on it in October, and that's changing. We're putting emphasis on it right away. Students have told us that they would be able to focus better, right, and concentrate so often better if they can get that out the way so that they can feel safe. So often as adults, there's so much trainings in the beginning and so many things, so we try to spread things out. Really, it's really about coming in and prioritizing, which should happen first. And it's been made loud and clear that these safety protocols are very important. So, we also have some ongoing safety measures, and I'll just kind of highlight just some of the main critical ones, and let you read through some of the other ones. But like our critical incident drills now happen twice annually, whereas before we required schools to do one critical incident drill per year. Now it has to be 2 per year. I mean, the reality is, we have a fire drill every month. But we haven't had a fire in our schools, in any schools nationally, since like the 50s. So it's really time for our country as a whole just to take a turn. And unfortunately, I mean, we want to be careful about how often we do this drill, because obviously it creates anxiety and stress levels go up. But it's one of those things where if you're going to have the fire drill once per month, then we really think through how often we have this drill, even if it's a low-level tabletop discussion, because this is now our reality, and we have to prepare for this. Each school has a designated building emergency response team, right? Those are individuals in the school that are assigned a task in case of an emergency. So for example, if the principal gets on the PA and says, we're going into a building secure, well, how do we know the building is actually secure? Like, who's doing that? So there's a team of people that they're assigned a door, a responsibility. They go to that door and they check and make sure that door is actually secure. Maybe it was a snowstorm and there's some snow that got between the door, or a door just didn't close, or somebody propped it open. Or we do have systems in place where if there is an actual emergency, somebody is checking that door to make sure that it is actually secure. Excuse me. And so that team also meets periodically, does tabletop discussions, do scenario. The last scenario we created stem from what happens if it's a large snowstorm that was sold in, to an angry parent coming to the school demanding to get a child. All right, what do you do? How do you respond? Right, we can have our staff thinking on this regularly. So let's talk about Robb Elementary a little bit. So, sure. Let's get down to this. How you want? That's good. Oh, I did. I see what you said. A few slides. All right, cool. So before I get to Robb Elementary, I'll highlight some more major safety updates that we're doing. So our visitor registration system, which is used to conduct sex offender checks. Our Raptor system, where it asks for a photo ID, that's still full in effect. I actually tested it last week and it's working. I just found all of our staff on our front desk, people are trained on using it. Now we've implemented a different system as well, where our visitors get a red lanyard or red ID badge, so they're more easily identifiable. And everybody is trained on, if you see somebody that don't have this name tag on or red badge, ask them like, how can I help you? Right. That's one of the main security features that is effective for school systems. All of our schools have the buzz-in system at their door. Even our schools that don't actually have a security interest, they're always like. So all of our schools remain in this security locked position, right? You can't go to any door and just walk into school. You will have to push the button, talk on the intercom, and then someone will let you in. Next slide. And so obviously, per state law, we have to continue to maintain our fire records, our tornado records. And so I have a drill sheet that each of the principals fill out, turn in to me, that I turn in to the stage, just to make sure that we are in line and with all of these important practices. I talked a bit about the tabletop functions that we do as well. These tabletop functions are not just within our school, but also our law enforcement and first responder community. And so I'll talk a little bit about Robb Elementary now. So obviously our hearts and our prayers still go out to the family of the loved ones that were lost in that tragedy. It's important that we that work in this profession, study all of these events and to figure out, not necessarily to pose blame or anything, but just to figure out how to prevent them from happening here. So that is exactly what I did. I just want to read some of the quotes from the after action report that stood out to me. One of the quotes is, there was a regrettable culture of non-compliance by school personnel who frequently ignore security procedures by propping doors open and deliberately circumventing locks. Another quote said, in fact, the school actually suggested circumventing the locks as a solution for the convenience of substitute teachers and others who lacked their own keys. Another quote stated, multiple witnesses told the committee that employees often left interior and exterior doors propped open using rocks, wedges, and magnets, partly because of a shortage of keys. So, for whatever reason, right, there's a whole system failure, right? A whole district system failure. And for whatever reason, the main thing that stood out to me was the word convenience. The word convenience kept popping up for me. And there was this culture of convenience over safety. So as I'm thinking about Robb Elementary School and the Verona area school districts, the main thing that I'm teaching, the main thing that I want to drive home to our administration, to our teachers, and to our students is to create a culture of safety over convenience. And so in order to do that, because you can have people watching the doors, you can have folks, checking doors and all these things in place. But if the mindset of the majority of people have not changed, so if little Jim feels like he can always prop a door open, or if a staff member, instead of taking the time to bring her keys to get something from her car, always pops the door open, all of the ability to secure stuff you do is not going to matter, right? Because the mindset of staff has to change. So the main thing that I'm drilling home with our staff is that there needs to be, and I'm not saying that our culture is of rocks, but I do want to enhance it, right? There's always room for improvement. So I'm really driving home that there needs to be a culture of safety over security, and that's going to be my main message to everybody. And for example, our old policy was that we use these strike plates in our classroom doors. So our doors would remain in the locked position, but there's a strike plate in the door so that kids could come in and out, teachers can come in and out, and in case of an emergency, you just remove the strike plate and the door is locked and secured. Well, what if your room is the first room the shooter comes to? Or what if you forget to remove it? Or what if in a high stressful situation, you're fumbling with it, right? We don't have time for that. So one thing that we're moving to effective immediately is that teachers will teach with their doors locked and closed at all times. We're not gonna have to remove a strike plate. That's just the position that it's gonna be in. Will it be inconvenient, especially for our elementary students? Yes, it will. But I believe that our teachers are capable and smart enough to figure out systems for their classrooms to adapt to that. Many teachers welcome this, right? But it's all about safety over convenience. So that's a new rule that we're moving to. Another thing that we're developing is a team of custodians, maintenance, security personnel, and our building emergency response team members to frequently check exterior doors. In addition to that, I've talked to Verona Police Department and Fitchburg Police Department about frequently checking doors at all of our schools. So if a police officer is going on a lunch break or they just get off a call or whatever it is, drive past the school, just pull over for about 10 minutes and check the doors of that school. If a teacher is walking down the hall and you're going to warm up some food, just real quick, as you walk past that exterior door, go check it, right? It's about driving home that culture. And so, and in fact, there's a Fitchburg police officer in the room, Officer Saffold. I won't call him little cuz, it's my cousin, but I'll call him Officer Saffold. And he and I just were having a conversation about this, right? About, and his sergeant, about developing like this liaison position in Fitchburg, where he would, go periodically check doors, go eat lunch with the students, be the main person to receive calls for consistency's sake, right? Build that relationship. Those are the type of bonds that we're trying to build with our law enforcement community. But I want everybody to check doors, everybody from bus drivers to the teachers to superintendent to myself, because that was the main thing that we got from Robb Elementary, was the ease at entering that building because of the amount of doors. 3 doors were propped open on that side of the building that the shooter entered in. So even if he didn't get in the door that he went to, he would have had other options, right? And we want to prevent that. So that's pretty much what the continuous improvement that we got from Robb Elementary, which I think is huge, right? I think the teaching with doors closed lock is a big one, but it's going to add to the safety of our school district. We have a wonderful security team. These folks, words can't explain how grateful I am to them for the work they do. It's important to know that this is a district-wide security team, right? They don't just do work in the high school. They get calls from Country View, we get calls from Glacier Edge, we get calls from middle school, and they get right over there to those calls. And they mitigate a lot of problems, a lot of situations that we don't hear about because of the work these guys do. And they do an excellent job. They respond to bad bus. When bus drivers are having a hard time, security goes. So they just do a phenomenal job. So I just want to start from your left, if you're in the audience, to the right, and introduce Diamond Howard, Jeffrey Mitchell, Rex Miller, Cortez Rose, and Quentin Cannon. Those are our security team members. And our new security team lead, actually here in the room, is Quiana Foster. Can you wave your hand? Or Quiana Foster, thank you. You can give her a hand. Quiana Foster will be starting as our security team lead for the upcoming school year. Quiana has come in, it's been just a year, right? Wow. She has come in and has done an absolutely amazing job with her level of building relationships with students. They call her auntie, and she just does an amazing job. And it was no question it would be the security team lead from this point. But this entire team, I hear a lot of compliments about Jeffrey Mitchell over at Badger Ridge. This entire team does a phenomenal job at building relationships. And my motto is prevention through relationships. If we have those strong bonds, those strong relationships, that's how we prevent, a lot of the things happening. And they do that every day when they're at school. Let me get through that. I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I want to give you guys some time to ask some questions. We did some camera upgrades at some of our schools. We replaced some exterior doors, so those doors that wouldn't close all the way, wouldn't latch. We got those replaced right away. We upgraded our visitor screening system with the red lanyards that I explained. We're doing the grid mapping, which is a DPI grant that we applied for and it's going to get approved. We've updated our crisis response manuals. The crisis response manual is kind of like the Bible for what to do in emergency, right? We've updated all of that. We've added social unrest to that and how principals should respond in those situations. So some things that, and this I'll finish with this, these are some things that I wanted principals to have done, before students arrive. And that is set the dates and have a plan for your active threat training. The one that said has to happen early at the school year. And before we get back on, principals to set those dates for that to happen. Updated their emergency response crisis guides. Per Act 143, we're supposed to print a hard copy of those guides and have them in our office, and we did that. I want them to assign BERT members their duties. These people that respond in emergency, I want them to know exactly what they need to be doing so that if it's the second day of school and an emergency happens, they know what to do, and then to pre-plan all of our safety drills. Obviously, things come up, we have to, change them, but at least there's a plan in place that helps us stay organized on task. So, sorry I went so long. I was going to try to cover a lot for you because I hadn't been here in a while to talk about safety and security. So, with that being said, anybody has any questions?
I want to first. It has been a while since we gotten to see you and get a great overview. But I want to say, just having been on the board since you've been in our district, you've changed the culture of our district in this regard on every front and every facet for VASD, better for our students. And I'm really grateful for all that you do, because it is definitely noticed, it is appreciated, it is commented on by our community members. Most importantly, it's commented on by our students, that they have relationships with you and your security team, and that they feel more safe in our buildings because of that. So I'm very grateful to the work that you do. I hate that we have to talk about these awful incidents that have happened elsewhere in the country, but I'm also glad we can do so in a way to be preventative and proactive for our own school. The thought that you're dealing with the city of adolescents is kind of terrifying. Wow, I hadn't thought of it like that. So sleep well tonight. That's
Right. Exactly.
But I think it's so important that kids are going to make bad decisions. And largely, aside from the social unrest issues that are channeling energy in appropriate ways, you also have the issues where you're dealing with kids who are just making dumb decisions. And I appreciate that we're keeping kids focused and building relationships is a priority, but also safety for everyone else, so that there are ramifications for those dumb decisions that are falling on others. You've really just done an amazing job. I'm very, very grateful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question as well. So I'll try and get through my question without getting emotional, but I just wanted to thank everybody who is part of this team. As a mom, maybe actually somebody needs to ask that question. I'll be a big kid. As a mom sending my kindergartner to school, it's definitely something that I worry about. So I guess first, thank you to you and to everybody on the team. You mean so much to all of us. But my question was, do you have a talk track that you give to parents? I think about my 5-year-old trying to understand what the drills are. And while I'm so happy that you're teaching her those, how do you help parents understand how to talk to their children without, to your point, inducing more anxiety in them? And how do you kind of tell a 5-year-old, like, this is why we're hiding in the classroom, just in case? Do you have resources for first-time parents?
That's a great question. So I really rely on our elementary age school principals to really deliver that message. One that comes to mind is Todd Bruner. He does an excellent job at really the way he methodically and systematically teaches the lesson to that age group. When I observed it, it just made a lot of sense within the communications that he sends out beforehand to the parents for them to read. It's almost a lesson in and of itself, that something that they could apply at home. So that's what I really rely on. I don't have per se for myself that communication like that for parents, because I really rely on the principals. They're the educators, so I give them the safety stuff and they figure out how to put it in a way.
Because they have the age context too.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? They're the experts in that field. So they know how to take what I have and really communicate it, not just to the students, but also to the parents. And so they do these communications before
Awesome.
they do these drills. And if there's a parent that call in or anything, they'll have that conversation with those parents before that happens. So then they do a great job at doing that.
Thank you.
I have a question too. First of all, really appreciate this, especially the level of detail. You could have gone on even longer, and you would have had a rapt attention from all of us. Yeah, this is so important. And so I have several questions, so I apologize to everybody for taking time too, but it's very important. And that's
Sure.
kind of the reason why. I loved all the content. I thought it was great. One question I had was, you talked a lot about culture of safety, which I think is so important. How do you prevent against it's somewhat easy to establish a culture of safety now when we have these horrific incidents so fresh in our mind. But how do you protect against this like complacency creep that happens over time? Because what I want is for there to be a culture of safety 2 years from now when we haven't had incidents like this at the front of our minds. So when we're thinking about things like having people periodically check doors, I bet people right away at the start of this year are going to check them all the time. But I worry that like 2 years from now, maybe they won't check them all the time. So how do you think about protecting against that complacency creep from coming in?
That's a great question.
Let me take that one, Corey.
Complacency creep. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Great question. And so a couple of things that stood out in the slide, and I'll go a little bit deeper as well. The piece where we are doing periodic checks that include the Verona Police Department and Fitchburg Department, the police department, that partnership in itself is so important. And I'm so impressed with this team and how tight that bond is. So that's not because we're fresh off the Uvalde. This is the partnership that is a must that we will do as a district. I don't think our director would mind me saying we've also built in a progressive consequence system for sites that don't meet the standards of our safety protocols. And you never want to get to that stage, but that's how important safety is in our schools. And so we have adjusting the language around that and building that into an expectation around employment as well, that you have to follow these key protocols because our students and staff safety comes first. You can't sign a letter saying safety is our number one priority and not mean it. And so we have those steps now in place.
I'll add to that. You mentioned one of the things you mentioned is door checks, and people get complacent, with that. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing, and our operations manager Mike will be doing, is we're literally going to each site and taking a note of, my clipboard, taking a note of any doors that are open or anything like that, and referring that. And you heard Dr. Clary say, and again, it's not like, you want to be like that, dropping a hammer, but however, you kind of have to in this day and age. And so that's what we'll be doing. And so one of the things that my boss has told me that I have to do is, regularly, go and check to make sure that the systems that we put in place are actually happening. Another thing we've implemented, to your point, is the second drill that we're having in the next year, right? We only had it many times, we only had it that one time, right? But now that right around March, well, there's another one, and that one is more scenario based, and that's for students, right? To keep them on their toes, right? So that just when you think, oh, we got a new year and now everybody's getting complacent, bam, we go some more stuff to keep you on your toes. So there's some measures that we're putting in place throughout the year to make sure that what you were talking about doesn't happen.
In addition to that, Joanne, it's a great question. I know we can go on forever with just that one question. I want to be clear that it's not just about classroom teachers. It's all of our responsibilities as staff members. As you can see in the back of the room, the staff they're all lanyard up. They all have their IDs present. Those are expectations of how we carry ourselves and model the very expectations of safety that we expect in our classroom as well. So it takes one person not to follow our safety protocols to cause a deficit in the model. And so I needed to feel like I had to put that in the space as well, that I don't want to feel like it's the onus of only the classroom teacher. It is every Verona area school district staff member's responsibility to keep our building secure. I mean, I think there was a little too much evidence of it today when the board was trying to get inside because we were locked out, but that's
secure downstairs.
But we're adamant that our buildings are going to be locked down and safe.
Is there a separate reporting mechanism for reporting observed violations of safety protocols, or is that just the general tip line?
So the tip line is reserved, you mean by students or just in?
Anyone, like students, staff, anyone, if they observe someone else violating one of our safety protocols, what's the mechanism? Is there a mechanism for them to anonymously report that?
Sure. So that will be our tip line.
Okay.
The tip line, it has been effective for many different reporting and mechanisms. So it may not have initially been intended that way, but it definitely has been beneficial for us to utilize it in that way. So a lot of, for example, there were students when the confessions page was out, there was a couple students that reported on the tip line, hey, this page exists. I think this page is harmful. This page is damaging to our mental health. Can someone look into it, right? So that's not necessarily an immediate safety and security concern, but it was definitely a way for us to hear from our students anonymously about something that is troubling our student body. Even animal safety reported, I feel I'm concerned about the rabbits in there. And so we get a lot of stuff through the tip line, and we have gotten some prop doors or, reports, things like that have come through the tip line. So it just proved to be very effective.
Yeah, I just think of this because I work in healthcare, and one of the key elements to creating a culture of safety in my daily work is having this system, an online system for different observations of safety violations to be reported in a way that data can be tracked over time. You can see what areas are more problematic or what types of violations are more common, things like that. And that's one of the things you can use to help be more proactive in
Absolutely
addressing things.
I think to your point, what we can do is make that more known, like announce it more, that could be used for that. Right now, it is being used for that, but maybe to your point, that more people knew that, maybe we get more reports. But the tip line is set up in a way to track numbers and track data, so we would be able to easily keep those things that you described as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Corey, I just want to, I guess, also add to what Meredith said about how grateful I am to hear from you again, because it's been a while. But when I was looking through all of the bullet points, many of the practices were familiar to me, having been on the board when you've presented in the past. I just wonder, I know you're saying having 2 drills is a new initiative and all of the emphasis on doors. Is the emergency preparedness and violence prevention work group, is that relatively new, or has that been around for a bit? And it's been a while since we heard from you.
That is not new. We met, that was developed, I would say 2 years or so before I was hired.
Okay.
And the primary reason it was developed was to develop the threat assessment process. After the threat assessment process was complete, we continued to meet, discuss these things we found beneficial. At the time, there was a lot happening in the community, so we were sharing a lot of information that we found it to be beneficial during that time. What happened was COVID. So we stopped meeting during that time, and what you saw now, what I announced was me kind of resurrecting that group, saying, okay, hey, we can come back together now and start having those discussions again. So
okay, thanks for clarifying that. And I think it's just always helpful to hear this again, because I think our community often has questions, and it's great to have this information at our fingertips to refer to, because people sometimes just don't, have a lot of questions, and rightfully so, uneasiness. I'm hearing from the parent of a kindergartner, there's an uneasiness in sending your child to school. I just want to say that in the time that I've had children in the district, so I have 1 entering high school, 2 who graduated, there's been so much positive movement and progress in the area of security, and I'm so grateful for that. And I want to call out the school, the security assistants, because I know my now college students, felt a shift when those people came on board, and my now incoming high schooler had a really good experience at middle school at Badger Ridge with safety. So those staff members have been really invaluable, I think, in the culture of safety in our schools, and in having students really feel that, and that prevention through relationship building. So I just wanted to call that out, having seen out the last 5 or 10 years how much of a difference that has made. So thank you so much for that and all the progress. And it's just great to hear from you some more updates on what's going on. And I always tell people I have such a measure of confidence in safety and security, while there's always room for improvement. And I feel really good about having a child entering the building in this district with knowing all the things that we do for security. So thank you for that.
I have another question that might be a nice segue into something we're going to be talking about later. It has to do with communication with families when there's an incident. And I'm trying to think of the right way to ask this. So there's these competing interests when there's an incident. There's trying to be as open as we possibly can with our community and with our families. At the same time, you want to protect against telling people things turn out to be wrong. and telling people things that violate the confidentiality of another student or the integrity of an investigation or anything like that. How do we balance those interests when we figure out how to communicate with people? Because I think one of the things we always hear about, although it seems to be getting a lot better, but I think we'll see in the survey data that there's still some room for improvement in terms of how transparent we are with our parents or how they perceive us to be transparent.
Yeah, Joe, I can start by trying to answer that, and then Corey or Dr. Thirty, if you guys want to hop in. Typically, when we have a major incident, I am the kind of the liaison between our public information officer, Dr. Clarity, and allowing Corey to do the work that's necessary to keep our schools safe, and kind of keeping all those balls in the air at the same time. And you, I think, put it really well that it's this delicate balance of making sure that what we get out there is accurate. And I'll tell you right now, most of the time I've got Dr. Clarity right in my pocket saying we need to get something out. Families know this. Social media is heating up, and we're making sure that we have what we're sending out is actually not going to cause a bigger issue. And then lots of times we're immediately heading to translation, putting it up on social media, getting on a website and pumping out a message to our families. And many times we'll share more information as soon as we have it. And that continues to be a delicate balance. Corey does an amazing job having us set up a hub with separate duties where Corey will be working with, if it's a major incident, potentially working with law enforcement or his security staff or our administrators, sharing information almost like wheels of a hub, us make sure we have it accurate, and then getting it to possibly Marcy, who's then getting a message out as quickly as we can. We're in an era where we have to act more quickly sometimes than we're comfortable with, because Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram and everything else is popping at a speed that we can't necessarily keep up with. The main thing is we want to make sure families have accurate information as quickly as we get it. Dr. Clarity, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
No, the same thoughts, just want to go a little bit deeper. Is that I think to your point, Joe, just explaining to our community before something happens that we will never beat the speed of information that doesn't have to be correct. Right. And that's the world that so it is our moral and legal obligation to have facts. Someone else that puts that out there doesn't have that same moral and obligation. And so when we are acknowledging that we know that you're not giving us new information, but the statement of what happened will always be slightly behind a social media story, because we have to make sure it's right, because what we know we can't get it wrong and then try to pull it back. That loses all of our credibility in our community, and people won't trust anything that we say. So we have to get it right.
The thing that I think is so important, I really appreciate you saying, is be proactive about that with families and letting them know ahead of time, hey, when we do communication, this is what to expect. Because I just think of some of these examples of some of the incidents that Cora's talking about, where I see some social media posts or hear some feedback from parents being frustrated about the communication, when in actuality, I was actually extremely pleased with how we handled the communication in each of those incidents. I thought it was fast, I thought it was accurate, and I thought it disclosed everything we possibly could for families. But I think there's an unrealistic expectation sometimes that we're going to tell them everything we think happened as soon as we think we know it, or like you said, at the speed of social media, which just isn't realistic.
One of the things that I'd like to just kind of ask everybody and maybe even call out, I think one of the things as a parent that's been most heartening for me is to see the strengthened collaboration between school district and our local law enforcement officers in Fitchburg and Madison and Verona, and building those relationships, because I, as a parent, want to know everyone's working collaboratively. And I really feel like those relationships have really grown significantly stronger. And I'm hearing that from multiple different areas in a way that is very positive.
Yeah, we've seen several of our higher level incidents last year where our local law enforcement actually recognized the value of that partnership in their world. That if we get information out ahead of time in a press release that they let out has conflicting information, They also have the exact same thing going on, where the community's saying, what are you hiding? Is there more to this? And so many times this year, we've been partners in making sure everything sent out was accurate and that we are on the same page regarding it. That's been super useful.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't speak enough to the strength of the partnership with the Verona Police Department and the Fitchburg Police Department. That Corey has done a phenomenal job of managing that relationship. But it's really the intentionality. As we are a student-centered organization, and we can't let adult issues get in the way of being a student-centered organization. And so we talk about the safety of students. We must and do collaborate and work together. And ultimately, just almost like in every situation, when you get in the same space and have good conversations, you learn that everyone at the table has the same exact end goal in mind. Is that doesn't always have the same methodology to probably get there, but we have the same end goal. And we know that, we are stronger when we work together. The picture that Corey showed, that's not staged. That's real. That's real collaboration, real work. And in fact, I give it Officer Saffel that's in the back of the room. That was last week. I was at the emergency responders event in Fitchburg. We met, invite. He's here. That shows his commitment. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things he could do on Monday night, and he's here with us because he's invested in the safety of our students. And while he'll be serving Fitchburg, he cares about doesn't care where the school's at. He cares about the safety of our kids, and so that's the type of partnership that we have, and that's why we're confident saying that safety is our number one priority, because we mean it, and we execute that way.
So I just want to say something quick. I was actually going to ask a question, and all of everybody else's questions gave me time to think it through, which is good. Because the answer is kind of I think so much of what we've been talking about seems reactionary, the events in Texas and reevaluate. And I think it's important to do that. But, my original question was going to be, how can we foresee, the next gap or challenge or, systemic breakdown, rather than just responding to what we see in other schools. And the answer that I came to after listening to everybody talk and after listening to this presentation and thinking it through is just in a sense of community that's being built. And, we started out talking about, the community relationships that you built with students, with your staff, building with students, and how the important roles that those have played. And on a micro level, noticing how people behave differently, because you're not going to have the catch-all tip line, not going to be in tune with the next social media thing that's popping off. The kids are posting things on. So you're not always going to notice everything. And you can either build a surveillance state to try to catch everything new, or you can build relationships. And to see that at the beginning of the presentation tonight, and then carried through the partnerships with law enforcement, that I agree, it has been really, really nice to see that develop. Those are the ways that I feel like that would answer that question of what happens next instead of what we're reacting to. And I just wanted to kind of bring it back and point that out, because while it's important, because I know I hear from parents too that are, see some of this news across the country that's happening in other schools, and it ratchets everybody's anxiety up about what could happen. And you always feel like you're reacting. The news is always presented in a way that's like, oh, if we'd have just done this one thing with the doors. But it's really so many things about like how that kid got to that place. And so to see that, this notion of, yeah, we're gonna lock our doors, sure, but we're also building a community so we can catch nice things. That's been really, really nice to hear throughout this whole thing. But I hope that's not getting lost as people maybe hear or see this through their own anxieties about, we're gonna lock the doors, which should be good, but also that there's a community being built, and we need to make sure that we're not leaving anybody out of it. I think it's all. So yeah,
John, you are 100% right. We just today, Corey and I are going back and forth. A student emails a guidance counselor saying something on social media was concerning, and even in the middle of August, relationships we have with our kids. That's really where, in my mind, that's really how we keep our schools the safest. The kids need to know we care about them and love them and want this place to be safe. Whether it's Diamond working with a student and having an issue related to a gun, or just somebody saying, you're a little off today, let's have a conversation. That's really where you keep your school safe. And all the locked doors certainly matter, but it's really about relationships with kids.
On that note, can I just make one comment, question, maybe it's a request, I'm not sure, it's somewhere in between. I feel like my students would tell me how much the school security assistance meant and how it was changing the culture, but sometimes I feel like it didn't always get to the parents or families at home. So I hope there's opportunities at some point for families to interact with some of those people, and or like I always say, you know, if I don't know the answer to a question they're asking or an uneasiness they have, I'm like, if you can contact Corey Saffold, I am confident you will be, you know, like assured that there's a threat assessment process. I don't know it intricately, but there is a thorough threat assessment process. I think people sometimes have those questions, and the more they can see those, the people that are, you know, working in security area and understand their roles and how hard they're working to develop relationship, it gives the family members a measure of confidence that maybe they don't have if they don't have those interactions. So wherever that's possible, I think would be.
I think
really
that's
great.
That's a good point, Christina. There was a recent share on LinkedIn, and like Corey, just hearing like we don't get enough background of folks who come up here, and like hearing everything you've done, I'm like, wow, this makes me feel very good as parents sending my kid here. So I agree
Yeah.
with you. Like, just the more we can share with families of like, look how talented these individuals are and how much just experience they have in
Right.
these situations.
And what prevention through relationship building means and how
Yeah.
they take that and the, you know, how hard they work at it, I think is really ensuring.
I think if anyone's ever been at a football game and you see the crowd and you see your security guards talking with kids all night long, it is,
It's a great
you know, relationships are authentic and they are really, really proactively
Yeah.
engaging. So again, I like, can't say how grateful I am because it's been a huge change since the time that you've been here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Absolutely. That's something to think about. How do we get the word out more? How do we get the face of security and what we present overall, you know, to parents more? And that's something I'll give that some thought. I appreciate feedback.
I mean, the end goal, families want to be helpful and the tip line's a great way, but having that, being able to interact, I think would give them a measure of reassurance, but also help our community be stronger working together in the same vein.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are there any additional questions from the board? Thank you for the amount of time. This is like such an incredibly important topic for the board and for the community, especially as we're heading back to school and in light of the climate that we're in. I hate that we even have to be thinking about this, and then I'm incredibly grateful for the one thinking about this nonstop and making sure that our students and staff are safe.
Thank you, Corey. Wonderful job. Wonderful job.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we are going to, you want to stretch them a little bit?
Break? We heading into a heavy?
Just don't leave, like 2 minutes.
Okay, we want to take a 2-minute break.
It's mostly for me, to be honest with you. So,
We'll take a 2-minute break, stretch legs, and then come right back.
yes.
Okay, remember, we're still live. Marcy? Our mic's still live. Let's Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the quick break. And let's move right to the next agenda item in the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you, everyone. And again, I want to thank Corey. Corey, thank you so much for your presentation. Be still there. And thank you, Chad, for the preparation. And I just want to give a shout out to the security team as well, and what they do to support our staff and our students on a daily basis and throughout the summer. There's no such thing as summer break when you're getting ready for safety and security of students. We're going to transition into our climate survey. And before we open it up to Marcy and and Dr. Dantzler, and the representation that will be supporting the presentation, I do want to remind the board that we do have a workshop on this topic on the 29th. And so it will be like the overarching themes, room for some questions, but we'll have an opportunity to go deeper into specific areas on the 29th, specific to this topic, and be able to go much deeper than the superintendent's report. Okay. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Marcy, and then Dr. Dantzler when necessary as well. And we'll hear about our climate survey.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So we've been hearing about the climate survey for a few months now. So we went through the process of preparing the district for the survey, launching the survey, collecting the feedback, and now we're at the point where we have a data dashboard prepared. We've been using the data in some ways. We will be looking to using it in additional ways in the future. So as Dr. Clarity said, we will be joined by Emily Beeson and Mary Kate Taylor from Hanover Research, and they will be going through an overview of the presentation for us. As we move forward, we'll be consulting with Dr. Dantzler, who has joined us in the audience tonight, to ensure that now that we have all of this great data, where it's kind of like walking through the grocery store and you didn't pick up a basket and you've got all this stuff, and what do we do with it now to help our schools inform their planning, help us inform our communication planning. And you'll see there are even some VASD operational expectation and indicator specific items that we had included in the survey as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Mary Kate and Emily.
Sure thing. Thank you so much. And I'll kick things off. Thank you all so much for having us this evening. So my name is Mary Kate Taylor, and I serve as the relationship director on behalf of Verona's membership with Hanover. So I work with all of our members in the state of Wisconsin and nearby states in the region. And I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Emily Beeson. And before we dive into the specifics of the climate survey, I just kind of wanted to provide this group a brief overview of who Hanover is and speak to how we support our K-12 members. So Hanover is a custom research firm. We're located in Arlington, Virginia, so just outside of Washington, D.C. And we've supported over 700 school districts, regional education service agencies, and state departments of education across the country, really on a variety of academic and operational initiatives. So work with our members through an annual membership model that allows folks to expand their capacity for research in a cost-effective way, and really to leverage that third-party perspective to conduct evaluations and help inform decision-making. So we work very closely with leadership teams at districts across the country to really understand the specific priorities of the district and of the administration, and then create and execute custom research agendas specifically tailored to those needs. So Hanover really does this through a multi-methodological approach, where members can leverage the full range of our research methodologies for those custom projects. So the first bucket there would be the gathering of stakeholder feedback. So through survey design, administration, and analysis, which is certainly pertinent to what we're discussing tonight. Also with qualitative researchers on our team that can conduct in-depth interviews and focus groups. Another bucket of support is data analytics. So an in-house quantitative team that really works with student level data in order to understand the impact of programs and initiatives at the district and at the school sites. And then finally, we have a team of secondary researchers who really work to identify best practices and synthesize the literature on key topics of interest, as well as conduct benchmarking. So some of those comparative analyses on the departmental policies, practices, and procedures of peer and aspirant districts across the country. So again, just wanted to provide that high level overview so you had a sense of who we are, and I'll pass it to Emily so that way we can talk specifically about the climate survey.
Sure. So it's great to be with all of you this evening. My name is Emily Beeson. I'm a senior director here at Hanover. So in my role, I oversee all of our custom research work in the Southeast region, up through the Mid-Atlantic, and throughout the Midwest. I oversee all of our custom research work, including survey work, which is what we're going to be talking about this evening. And as we're going through the findings, I do invite you to ask any questions, whether it's regarding methodology or any of the findings themselves, as we walk through some of these charts and as we walk through some of the proposed next steps. So with that, I'll dive in and give just a little bit of background on the survey itself. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the background of the survey to present an overview of total respondents. To give a little bit of context, when we're doing a climate survey, we've developed a series of set constructs. And we're going to be going through the survey results construct by construct this evening. And what that means is we're looking at school climate, and we've identified a set of constructs that are indicative of how we can do a pulse check or a temperature check on where different stakeholder groups are when they are perceiving the culture and climate of the entire district and relative to their schools. So when we're taking a look, we really want to see survey results as a broad brushstroke to be able to look at where are the district's strengths, where are areas for further improvement or for need, where should we be setting goals, and how should we be monitoring those goals for continued improvement. And I share that with you all as we're going through each of these, just to be able to anchor some of the findings to the purpose of the survey itself. As we're looking at the background here, we can see we surveyed students, staff, and families across the pre-K through high school levels. And as we're going through the results, we're disaggregating, or rather segmenting that data based on respondent role. And we ended up capturing almost 4,000 responses throughout the entire district, which is a really strong sample size, especially given this past school year. Nationally, we saw a decline in response rates for surveys, and this was particularly strong. So as we're looking at the results, keeping that in mind, that this is truly representative of the district. And I would encourage us to think about the survey results as baseline data to be able to monitor progress year over year. So in going into the survey results themselves, you'll see at the top of each slide which construct we're referring to. And so we think about climate over a couple of different constructs. First of which is building and school environment. What does that feel like to respondents? The academic environment, the attitudes and engagement, the social environment, and stakeholder inclusiveness. All of those elements are based on best practice research that we've conducted over a number of years to be able to identify what does it mean, or what are those core elements that need to come together when we're thinking about climate. So we've pulled a number of questions that were the most pertinent to be able to describe school and building environment, or to be able to contextualize the perceptions. That doesn't mean that this is the finite number of questions that were in the survey. The ones that we've highlighted here are the most encompassing of that particular construct. So as we're looking at these charts, we have all charts segmented by respondent group. All of the bars that are in that green color are student respondents. All bars in gray are staff, and all bars in blue are parents and families. What we're presenting are what we call the top two responses, or the most favorable. So when we're looking at a survey like this climate survey, all scales were a 5-point Likert scale. What we're presenting here are the percentage of respondents who indicated the top two selections. So typically it's strongly disagree to strongly agree. What we're visualizing are the percentage of respondents who selected either agree or strongly agree. So as we're diving into these results, looking at school and building environment as the first construct, what you'll see as a little bit of a theme throughout are across the board, parent perceptions and staff perceptions are typically more favorable throughout the survey than student responses. I note this because this is pretty indicative of how we see climate results across the nation, but I would really call out anywhere we're seeing quite a bit of disparity between those student and adult responses as areas to really refine when we're thinking about what do those next steps need to mean for Verona Area School District. So here, when we're looking at the first question, I think this ties in really well to what the first agenda item was when we're looking at safety. What we're seeing across the board, the questions being I or my child feels safe at school sponsored events and activities, or my child's school provides a safe learning environment, learning space for students. What we're seeing are high positivity or highly favorable responses, particularly among those adult respondents, but less favorable when we're looking at student respondents. The last question on the far right here, my school or my child's school does not have issues with violence or theft. This one really stood out to us because we're seeing more than half of parent respondents indicating that their child's school does not have issues with violence or theft, but we're seeing about a third of student and staff responses indicating otherwise. This is one that I would particularly call out because of that disparity across the respondent groups. As we get into the next slide, looking at school and building environment, we're looking both at the sense of belonging and feeling of welcomeness, and also some of the actual maintenance. When we're looking at the two charts on the left, the questions being students at my school or students at my child's school feel welcome at school or feel like they belong at school. Again, we're seeing more favorable, more positive perceptions of parent and staff respondents, and less favorable among student respondents. Typically, as a rule of thumb, when I'm looking at survey results, anytime we're seeing consistent results of 75% or more for favorable responses, that's pretty strong. I did want to call out students at my school feel like they belong at school, with 57% of students responding. That's one that I would really call your attention to as you're thinking about potential next steps or areas for improvement. Conversely, some areas that were quite positive when we're looking at the physical environment of the school and building, we're seeing high positive perceptions, particularly among adults with the maintenance of schools, school sites themselves, and having classroom environments that support student learning. The next area of the survey, or the next construct, is the social environment. We look both at the perceptions of student interaction, student to teacher interaction, and teacher to teacher interaction when we're thinking about the social environment. The questions that we've shown here, I think in the first two questions, you'll see that volatility again, or that difference again between student responses and adult responses. Agreeing that adults at my school or adults at my child's school care about students and respect students. This is quite a bit of a gap where we're looking at caring about students. 93% among staff agree, and 89% among parents agree, but we're seeing 68% when it comes to student voices. Similarly, when the question came to respecting students, again, we're seeing that gap. The consistency in enforcing school rules, this is also an area that emerged with a little bit of volatility across groups.
Marcy, can you pause there for a second?
Emily, one of our board members has a question.
Sure.
Would you prefer we say them till the end? Because I can, if that would be easier.
Could you hear that, Emily?
Oh, I apologize. I didn't realize you were directing the question at me. I'm happy to address questions as we go through.
Okay, thank you, Emily. I will
Sure.
use your name so that you know I'm talking to you instead of just the ether. I asking this more for younger students. My wonderful 5-year-old would tell you that it is disrespectful of me to not give her everything that she wants. So like wondering in, for example, areas of elementary segment, is there any lens ever applied? When you get to older students, I think they do have a really good grasp of respect, and little kids in some areas too, right? Like body autonomy, things like that. Is there ever a lens put on top of the responses, or do you see from other areas that normally elementary skews different, or do you see it pretty even across all the groups?
Sure. So in terms of it kind of comes back to our methodological approach. So with this particular survey, and I should have mentioned this at the onset, the results that we're seeing when it comes to students only in grades 6 and above responded to these questions. And we make sure that that's the threshold so they can understand the concepts that are being asked throughout the survey. Anything that's particularly complex, and I don't believe in this survey that we had asked anything particularly complex, we reserve for students who are even older, so grades 9 and above. We did, however, design and administer a similar survey for students in grades 3 through 5 that had much more simplified concepts within each of the constructs. Those results aren't comparable here, where we can take a look at both of those results side by side because the questions are a little bit different. But in terms of survey methodology, we really like to maintain thresholds and when it comes to grade bands. Students being surveyed under grade 3 typically don't have the same reliability as we are thinking about students as survey respondents to be able to address those questions. So when it comes to the results we're seeing on this particular slide and throughout, we're looking at students grades 6 and above.
Thank you.
And we also did present the results in a dashboard format, and there's ways for us to be able to sort and filter and segment results in different ways to see what trends do look like, if there are any points of differentiation or statistical significance. In this case, we're just looking at the aggregate results. Any other questions up until this point? So on the far right, the two charts on the far right are looking at consistency and fair enforcement of school rules. And this is an area that you'll see when we look, when we continue to go throughout the survey results. This was an area that stood out to us as seeing quite a bit of differentiation across respondent groups and perceptions being less positive relative to other questions. So we're seeing staff respondents in particular having less favorable perceptions of adults at their schools consistently enforcing school rules or fairly enforcing school rules. Parent perceptions here are quite a bit more positive. The next area to go into would be the academic environment, when we're actually thinking about the day-to-day academic and instructional environment. What we're seeing here are fairly positive results, especially when we're looking at these top 3 charts. So looking at my school or my child's school provides enough technology resources, wants students to succeed, and provides enough material resources. I would call these out as being some of the most strong findings throughout the survey, some of the most favorable results, and something to continue to monitor year over year to make sure that these numbers do consistently stay high, that perceptions are continuing to be positive. One other item to call out is we're seeing student perceptions slightly less positive across the entire survey, but here there's quite a bit of alignment in terms of student perceptions relative to adult perceptions. As we're looking at the second set of academic environment questions, my school or my child's school provides a well-rounded curriculum, sets high expectations for student achievement, and adequately challenges advanced students. There's a little bit of volatility here. We're seeing provides a well-rounded curriculum. We have parent responses quite a bit more positive relative to staff and students. And when we're looking at setting high expectations for student achievement and adequately challenging advanced students, this is where perceptions are a little bit lower relative to some of the other constructs in the survey. As we're getting into the next part of the academic environment, and this is the most substantial part of our climate survey in terms of sheer number of questions, we have a couple of areas called out here, and I think from a glance you'll see student perceptions here again being less positive relative to adult respondents, and consistently seeing parent responses more favorable than students and staff. So looking at these, we're seeing ability to collaborate with others, or rather the district or school develops students' ability to collaborate with others develops their critical thinking skills, their listening skills, ability to engage and self-reflection, ability to empathize with others, sense of moral and ethical conduct, ability to resolve conflict, ability to manage emotions. A lot of these are very social emotional in nature. There are some areas where we're seeing strength emerge, but when we're particularly looking at that lower row of charts, there looks to be quite a bit of area of improvement, especially when it comes to ability to resolve conflict and ability to manage emotions and thinking about the student perspective in responding to these questions. Again, we're seeing parent responses across the board quite a bit more favorable relative to the other respondent groups. And then the last area when it comes to academic environment, what we really wanted to take a look at were individual student groups and the perception of these individual student groups. I will say for these student groups, we can also break this down a little bit further and look at respondents who did fit into these categories, who are English learners, who are parents of English learners, or who serve English learners. And same for students receiving special education services to probe a little bit deeper. But across the board, we're seeing more positive perceptions when looking at student responses, lower perceptions looking, or less positive perceptions looking at staff responses, and parents somewhere in the middle when looking at school providing enough resources and supports for these various groups, looking at English learners, special education students, high achieving students, underperforming students, and looking at students' mental health and well-being overall. I would say in particular with all of the districts that we're currently working with, the students' mental health and well-being is certainly an area of priority, especially as we're thinking about sense of belonging and sense of wellness. The next area is student attitudes and engagement. The big thing I think you'll see when we take a look at this slide, our student perceptions of attitude and engagement are less favorable than staff. I will caveat that by saying nearly every climate survey that we do has this pretty large gap between student perceptions and staff perceptions, which you'll see when we're looking at the specific questions and thinking through the lens of students. So in looking at these particular questions, most students at my school work hard, come to class prepared, get excited to learn new things, enjoy learning, and are motivated to learn. We're seeing pretty favorable perceptions, more positive perceptions among staff, and less positive perceptions among students, with the lowest being most students at my school enjoy learning. Again, this is fairly in line with what we're seeing nationwide when we look at this set of questions and this construct, but still an area to call out as likely something that we want to focus on as we're looking at these results year over year. And looking at the social environment, which is on the next slide, this is looking at another aspect, or I believe this may be a repetition of a previous slide for social environment. If we want to go to the next slide of looking at the percentage of students who experience bullying and harassment. In the way that we're looking at this question is based on different characteristics or based on different experiences. And so what we're looking at here in terms of percentage are the percentage of students who experience bullying or harassment only a few times a year or almost never. So in this case, we're flipping that Likert scale and looking at the bottom two, just to give you some context as to why these numbers look quite high when we're thinking about the bullying and harassment question. So a higher number would indicate more positive responses, lower number would indicate less positive responses here. So we're seeing the social environment when it comes to bullying and harassment with regard to religion, disability, sex being less common or less frequent. Conversely, bullying and harassment relative to physical appearance, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, and race ethnicity being more frequent relative to the others. You'll also see the political beliefs. That's where we're seeing quite a bit of differentiation between staff perceptions and student perceptions. One thing that also stands out to me, just again, in seeing the national perspective, typically we see quite a bit of difference between staff responses and student responses. One thing that really stands out when I'm looking at this question in this survey is the perceptions are quite similar between staff members who took the survey and students who took the survey, which again, this is a tough question to break down, but that is one takeaway, that perceptions are not so drastic relative to many of the national surveys that we've done. And the last core construct of the climate survey is stakeholder inclusiveness. We position this question separate for staff members and separate for parents. So we're looking at the percentage of respondents who agree or strongly agree when it comes to staff, that the district engages the community, responds to community members' questions or concerns, effectively communicates with community members, and is transparent about community members about district decision-making. We can see the question was worded slightly differently, which is why we've separated these when we're looking at parent responses. Overall staff responses are slightly more positive relative to parents, but again, it looks to be quite a bit of room for improvement, especially when it comes to the transparency with community members or with parents around district decision-making. The engagement, perceptions of engagement are slightly higher. And we're also seeing from the parent perspective, the effective communication with parents. 2/3 of parents are agreeing that the district effectively communicates with parents. I would certainly say that's an area of strength, but in looking at 66% responding that they agree or strongly agree, that would be an area that I would recommend, although it's one of the stronger components of this construct, to continue to focus improvement. In the last area of the survey were questions connected to operational efficiencies and outcome indicators. So I would again recommend looking at these questions on a longitudinal basis to be able to have metrics to measure against, to look at progress. So the first one, and Marcy, please feel free to expand on the connection here. How positive or negative is your overall impression of the culture and climate at VASD? 50%, and this question was posed just to staff, 50% indicated somewhat positive or very positive. Again, the top two selections on the scale.
And just looking quickly, the indicator one goal for that was 60%. So as Emily said, this will serve as really good baseline data. And I think some things for us to think about with this indicator and the following two indicators are sort of the technical pieces of this and the culture or relationship pieces of this. And Mr. Saffold and Mr. Weezy spoke a lot tonight about the relationship pieces of it, the culture building pieces of two-way communication and things like that. And we're also working to put some of those more technical pieces in place so people know who to contact for what.
The next question that was specific to the outcome indicators, please indicate how much you disagree or agree with the following statement. VASD has a culture of two-way communication. This aligns back with one of the previous questions in the survey quite a bit in terms of effective communication with parents. In this case, about 54% of respondents parent respondents indicated they agreed or strongly agreed with that question. And Marcy, if there's anything to add when it comes to the indicator, please jump in.
We can move on to the final VASD specific indicator.
Perfect. So the last one, how informed do you feel about the direction of VASD? We're looking at, again, the top two selection of somewhat informed or extremely informed. Parent and staff respondents were both quite similar in their responses here, but we're seeing roughly a third indicating that they feel informed about the direction of the district. So again, as we're thinking about this as an indicator and seeing at least 65% of respondents expressing they were adequately informed, this would be one we would want to focus on and monitor year over year. Before I dive into some of the findings and recommendations, I wanted to pause here and just see if there are any questions, either when it comes to the survey itself, the methodological approach, or anything in between.
I do have one quick question. You've mentioned a couple of times in other nationwide surveys. Are these questions that are in this survey similar to questions asked in others in a way that we have nationwide benchmarking or peer district benchmarking that we can compare against, or are they unique to our district?
Sure. So these are all survey questions and constructs that we've developed and engaged many of our members with. Mary Kate, I don't mean to throw it over to you in case you might be able to explain a little bit more clearly, but we do now have the capability to do some national benchmarking against the same questions. With the caveat being you would be benchmarking only against other districts that have also done this survey, and it's certainly not a perfect representative sample of the entire country, but it can be very helpful to take a look at to compare where you sit. Mary Kate, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you covered it, and that's been something that we've been doing for other members as well, and sometimes even just a simple chart of the comparison between responses, and to Emily's point, across the national sample. So we can always discuss with Marcy if that's something you all want to tackle and follow up.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm happy to start going through some of the overall findings, although we've discussed most of these as we've been walking through.
Any
Right.
additional questions?
And Emily, I think just maybe briefly taking a look at these, as you said, we've talked about a lot of them. Do you have the opportunity for an upcoming workshop where we'll be discussing them more in depth as well? And just for the board's reference, we have linked in the OE that each of the recommendations relates to, where we feel like we are making strides toward meeting some of these recommendations.
So I'll touch kind of at a high level through some of these recommendations, again, because we've already touched on quite a few of them. A lot of these are based on not only the survey findings, but our best practice research. Behind me and behind Mary Kay, we also have a large team that supports the development of survey findings, survey recommendations, just thinking about former educators also coming in with methodological experts to formulate these. The first one that we wanted to share is encouraging the district to help staff recognize, prevent, and disrupt bullying, especially for students in grade 6 and higher. We're seeing quite a bit of frequency when looking at that bullying and harassment question, and certainly need to dive into that a little bit further. That would be a recommendation as we're getting into this next school year. Oftentimes we're seeing staff respondents indicate that bullying is happening less frequently than students are reporting. As educators in the room, and Mary Kate and I are former educators as well, that's not the biggest surprise, but it's certainly something that we want to be able to monitor on an ongoing basis. The next one being offering guidance to staff to ensure school rules are being fairly and consistently enforced. This is one that stood out quite a bit as being less favorable when we were looking at that particular question. And again, one that we would recommend monitoring year over year. The last recommendation on this slide is continuing to provide staff with a healthy working environment. This was actually quite a positive question where we were seeing responses to. 98% of staff in this survey have positive relationships with students, positive relationship with other staff members, and believe that their managers care about them. That's a real strength and something that would be wonderful to be able to communicate and continue to monitor to make sure that those numbers do stay as positive as they are. And then on the last slide, the last two findings and recommendations are increasing transparency and communication with the community, parents, and staff. Certainly this ties back into one of the indicator focused questions that we had taken a look at, but when we're looking at where the indicator goal is, there's room for improvement. And then lastly, consider conducting additional research with staff around their impression of the culture and climate of the district. We can do qualitative in-depth interviews or focus groups with staff to be able to understand what are some of those pinpointed, very specific things that the district can do, or understand what are their perceptions of culture and climate. When we're thinking about survey, we look at survey results from a broad brushstroke perspective, but we can use qualitative methodologies to dig a little bit deeper. And certainly that would be a recommendation. especially with that data point looking at 50% have a positive impression of the culture and climate as an area that we might want to figure out a little bit further. What is that 50% saying, and what is the other 50% saying, to dive a little bit deeper. So with that, again, I'll pause here and see if there are any questions or anything I might be able to clarify.
And I would like to thank you, Emily and Mary Kate. Believe it or not, this is just the tip of the iceberg on the data that we have available to us through the survey. So we're very excited to have this information. We're very appreciative for our principals and our staff, who we owe our great response rate to them. They really made sure that their students and their staff completed the survey. So we appreciate that as well. I just wanted to mention again that we'll be working with Dr. Dantzler to use some of this data to the best of our ability so that we can make improvements and changes that relate to the data. Wanted to open the floor to you if you had any thoughts or suggestions, or are just encouraged by what you're hearing as we move forward.
So as Dr. Dantzler takes the stage, first I want to thank Dr. Dantzler for being a willing partner with the Verona Area School District. As you know, as board members, we do not have a research and evaluation department. And so we look for both the mindset of a statistician, or the skill of a statistician, but the mindset of the deep demographic work that our board expects to go deeper into what are specific groups experiencing in our school. And we've established a partnership with Dr. Dantzler, both because we know of his skills as a statistician, and I'll be very frank, he doesn't mess around when it comes to representation not occurring in our schools, in our district. And so we're very proud to have his skill set to take us on this journey. We have our baseline. We didn't know where we were going to start, but now we know, and now we begin the journey.
Thank you, Dr. Clarity. Thank you to the board, and thank you, Hanover, for the great research. I definitely just want to help the school district improve, continue to look through this data and take a deeper dive, as Hanover mentioned. As Dr. Clarity stated, some of the climate data, the biggest thing with climate surveys is the N. And it looks like you got a great number of responses to have a great baseline to begin to really dig deeper in some of those numbers, and also take more of an equity lens as well, and look at these numbers and kind of look at them by different demographic groups, and begin to look at things from an intersectionality perspective as well, and also by building to kind of really get into policy and see where the areas of improvement are, and also where the areas that you want to grow upon as well. So I look forward to working with Marcia for the board retreat and coming up with some questions and things for you all to work through there.
Yes. In addition, Dr. Dantzler will be, as you may know, we spent the last week going over this data at the principal and school-based leadership team level, so they could prepare to design their continuous improvement plans based off this data. So now they're writing their culture and climate goals, but Dr. Dantzler's role is also really doing those probing questions and allowing our principals and our teams to go deeper with data sets that go farther than kind of the surface level that you see here. So we have him at our fingertips, and what I love about working with him is that he doesn't do any fluff, and we're not a fluff organization. So if we're not asking the right questions, there's a quantitative component of it, but he'll ask the right qualitative questions as well to make sure that we're getting to those whose voices may not be heard. And we see some disconnects right now between perceptions of adults and students, and those are the things that we need to go deeper into. So thank you for partnering with the Verona Area School District, and we look forward to great outcomes on behalf of our students. And I apologize for keeping me here for 2 hours for So with that, I want to thank the Hanover group as well for being a partner with that. At districts our size generally don't have research and evaluations departments. So this is a normally something that you would want to get outside support on. And I want to thank Marcy for her continuous work as well, to both getting the survey out, working through all the potential things that come up when you're trying to get a survey out to 5,000 students, and as well as all of our families as well. I want to close with this, is that I hope I desire that the board sees their policies and indicators begin to come to life with the kind of the baseline data that I remember those conversations like, this number too high, is this number too low? Where do we start? I don't know. Okay, but now we know. Now we know where to start. And I think the board during the workshop will also need to make some decisions on some of our OEs will come due before the next data set. So do you want to push those back to make sure that these power standards that the Hanover Group has identified, that you must ask these questions again to see how well we're doing now that we have the baseline? We don't want to do the operations report and you don't have the data set that you're looking for yet. So just a deeper discussion around, when we built a calendar together, it was based off a lot of assumptions, but now we have facts, and we may need to move some things around so you have the data that you're looking for.
I think this will be really helpful. I think I have one question and a comment. So my first comment is it's really helpful to see areas that we can go deeper in at the workshop and how we can utilize this data. My question for you is, how do we use the district-wide data? What are the next steps? And I think you kind of addressed starting with principals and leadership needs. But how do we envision using district-wide data as a starting point? It's a great baseline to have. We're coming out of a very unusual time, COVID, so I imagine
yeah, well, there's that, and there's also some of the decisions that we've made around how we will take on the next school year. When we talk about the collaboration as the conduit to healing, there's still clear evidence based on data that we need to still to grow and heal as a district. So that collaborative process was not kind of not of a guess. It was, here's data that speaks to our need to build community within our district. So that, to your point, that it is presented to staff and will be rolled out during convocation and as part of our professional development throughout the year. Our mindset around a singular academic focus, which is disciplinary literacy, speaks to, again, we have to be very clear on one specific area that we can do together and working towards that collectively. And based off this response, well, some know and some don't know. Or if there's one, everyone knows, because we have one goal. And so some of the leadership moves that have been presented to the board are a direct result of this data, and it's very exciting and for our leaders when they were able to look at their individual school data and think about their specific school strategies to allow them to go deeper at the building level. So it's a both and. There's both the district leadership piece of it, but we don't want 10 different organizations. We want to be a coherent system, and so that's part of why we have really narrowed down to one North Star conduit, collaboration, and disciplinary literacy. My academic services superstar team. Did I miss anything? I wasn't calling you up yet. I was just on.
They're ready.
They're ready to go. Yeah. Did I miss it? I was just talking about the culture and climate. Did I miss anything about our next steps and continue? All right.
Thank you, Mary Kate and Emily.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Are there any questions from the board? And again, keep in mind, we will be going deeper with this at our workshop. So I think it's great to get an overview, and it's really great to get baseline data. I also really am appreciative that student voice is represented here. I think that is critical, because their perceptions of their experience just so important.
Correct.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dancer. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Marcy. It's purely So, I think the answer is very short. It's been 4 questions.
Dr. Hawkins, I appreciate your readiness to just jump right up as soon as you're called.
I knew you all were waiting to hear such riveting information. Always.
Give it. No, let's make sure you have it.
Well, good evening. So glad to be with you all again this wonderful Monday evening. So we're going to jump right in. Every year, by state law, we are required to notify parents and guardians of the academic standards that guide instruction and learning in Verona. And so this aligns with the state standards. And so here in Verona, we use the Common Core state standards for English and language arts. We use the Common Core state standards for math. We use the Next Generation Science standards, and then we use the Wisconsin Social Studies standards. Those were most recently adjusted in 2018. And so within our district, we align our curriculum, we align materials and resources to the standards that we're presenting to you all this evening. We do this annually, and it is sharing this information with you all so you all know what we use to design and develop our curriculum.
Does Wisconsin not offer a science curriculum?
They do. However, we have found that the Next Generation Science standards are more in line with STEM and more forward thinking. So we use those.
Thank you.
So that's going to take us into OE11, and this is our instructional program. And so what we're going to share with you all tonight with our operations monitoring, we're going to assure you that the organizational performance is in alignment with the Board of Education values. The Board of Education will know the true operational performance of here at VASD, and will provide information to support the advocacy of district goals, and then we'll talk about the superintendent's performance. Is that your part, Dr. Clarity?
You did it well.
All right, then. So we're going to jump into the operations policy, and this is OE11. And so what this says is that the superintendent shall maintain a program of instruction that offers challenging and relevant opportunities for all students to achieve the outcomes defined in the board's results policies. So the interpretation, the Board of Education values curriculum and instruction that is challenging, standards aligned. So we shared with you all the standards a few slides ago: inclusive, culturally responsive, representative, innovative, and rigorous. All students will be given instruction that is personalized and works to prepare them to thrive in a diverse global society. The Board of Education expects the superintendent to ensure that all programs used to teach students are rigorous and designed to align to state standards, which will ensure high levels of student achievement measured by the board's results policies.
Thank you, Dr. Hawkins. And so as you're thinking about this first interpretation and the board expectations, this is, I really want you to just go back in memory for probably the last 3 to 4 sessions where we have discussed some of the leadership or staffing changes that we've made. These are specifically to support what you're seeing now in OE11, especially with the new role of Ms. Karen Sauce-Glover, and then the addition of Ms. Amy Engelkins on the secondary side, as well as the far more coherent system of our former student services department being appropriately aligned with academic services. So those were all policy-based decisions, but we needed to make sure that our personnel structure allow for these to come to life. So I just wanted that perspective as you thought about each of these policies.
Great, thank you, Dr. Clarity.
Thank you.
So with the interpretation for OE11, There are 9 terms that we've defined there, and just want to call your attention to them again because they will show up throughout the policies as we go forward. So understanding that what we mean by challenging is that learning experiences that develop upon and extend a student's abilities. Relevant, meaning curriculum and structure that's aligned to standards and representative of globally diverse topics and context. Curriculum that is standards-based sequence and planning experiences for students to practice proficiency, develop skills toward proficiency. Instruction, including the process of teaching and engaging students with content. Inclusive, about the development of accessible curriculum and environments so that each and every student can see themselves and be supported in learning community. Culturally responsive, which is an approach to teaching that recognizes the value of the learner's cultural beliefs and practices and draws upon them to inform instruction, to enhance their self-efficacy, and to bridge their home and school experiences. Representative, being an approach that proportionally reflects the backgrounds, cultures, and identities of students, families, and our community. Innovative, the idea that something is fundamentally different or offers a fundamentally different way of doing things that results in considerably better and perhaps different outcomes. And rigorous, being instructional design and delivery to ensure students are not only successful in standardized assessments, but they are also engaging in higher order thinking and application to real world situations.
So really quickly, I think what's unique about this one is that there were so many descriptors that were involved. We wanted to have very clear definitions of what we meant as a district within each of these areas. So I think maybe more appropriate, because each of these now live in the rest of the sections, that there are any questions around this piece of it, please ask them now, because they will influence potentially how we think about the rest of the indicators moving forward, or excuse me, the rest of the subsections moving forward. Let's go back to this.
All right.
No questions, it seems, so.
So for OE 11-1, the superintendent shall assure that instructional programs accommodate the different needs, abilities, interests, and personal goals of individual students. Again, the interpretation calls out that instructional programs are culturally responsive and employ teaching strategies to accommodate the learning styles and needs of all students. In the definition of terms, the first 3 bullets are in addition to the ones that we just reviewed. So different needs and abilities is about learning preferences that can be physical, psychological, social, emotional, and cognitive, as well as individual developmental needs. Interests and personal goals mean relative to particular subjects and topics that students want to learn, and learning styles include learning preferences, and again, varying physical, psychological, social, emotional, cognitive needs, as well as individual development levels and culture and language. So with OE 11-1, we have 3 indicators that we have identified. The first is that 100% of students with IEPs will have a tiered service delivery model. The second is that a course guide outlining academic opportunities will be distributed to or made available online to all secondary students and families. And the third is that the course selection process provides all secondary students the opportunity to select courses of interest, and that master schedules are built to support these selections.
Could you define what a tiered service delivery model is?
Sure. So it is intended to be responsive specifically to the student's needs, which would be related to students' disability. And in that, there's increased intensity and levels of support. And the most intense being what would look like one-to-one support for a student who might have both social, emotional, and academic needs. And those decisions are made through the IEP process. Okay. OE 11-2 is that the superintendent will assure that the curricular programs are aligned to the district adopted learning standards and that they are effective in assisting students to meet or exceed performance expectations as designed by results policy. So again, the interpretation there includes the standards, most of which we saw in the previous slide, but also specifically for this policy, standards related to the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages and Project Lead the Way, 2 areas of academic instruction that we wanted to call out specifically for those additional standards. Project Lead the Way, for example, is grounded in the national, the NGSS science standards, as well as the Common Core, but also includes national health standards and computer science and engineering literacy standards. So making sure that we are attending to those standards in the design of the curriculum as well. The one additional term to those that you already saw on the opening of the policy is the last one, which is the definition of standards, which reminds us that these mean clearly articulated statements of what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. So the indicators for this policy are 100% of Common Core state standards are reflected in the literacy and mathematics curriculum, and 100% of the curriculum for all subjects not listed above are aligned to Wisconsin state standards and or the vetted national standards. Again, going back to what I referenced with the national standards for health that we use in Project Lead the Way. Any question about that one? Okay. And then OE 11.3, the superintendent will effectively assess each student's academic performance, identifying and appropriately addressing significant inequities and gaps in achievement outcomes. For these definition of terms, we have 5 additional. So moving down to the 5th bullet, effectively assess shall mean the use of valid and reliable research-based assessment tools that are common across all schools by level to determine the student's progress in achieving the board's student results policies. Inequities is defined as a lack of fairness or the evidence of bias or favoritism. Gaps are varying outcomes as a result of inequitable opportunities. Representative outlines an approach that proportionally reflects the backgrounds, cultures, identities of students, families, and our community. And finally, targeted support provides and is aligned to additional instruction that supplements core teaching and learning. So our indicator for this policy is that annually the superintendent will create and communicate the district assessment calendar each academic year.
Here's a quick question for that. Communicate to who? Is it communicate to parents, to those staff?
To all of the above,
Okay.
yes, yep. It is published on our website and also communicated to staff and students.
So OE 11.4, the superintendent will ensure that the instructional program includes opportunities for students to develop talents and interests in their specialized areas of interest. And so 2 terms that we're going to introduce here, the last 2 bullet points, innovative, a fundamentally different way of doing things that result in considerably better and perhaps different outcomes. And specialized areas shall mean fine arts, career and technical education, world languages, advanced classes, independent study, and co-curricular opportunities. And so the indicators for this OE policy, indicator 1, the course selection process provides all secondary students the opportunity to select course of interest, and master schedules are built to support these selections. And then indicator 2, we will include a question within the district-wide climate survey for students in grades 3 through 5 to reflect on opportunities for interest-driven choices within their classes.
I have 2 questions on these. First, on the indicator 1, what is the mechanism through which that will be measured to make sure the course selection does provide courses of interest?
Well, at this point, we will have to kind of look at what we currently have, and we can do it one of several ways. We can talk with our students and use our climate and culture data, and poll students. Sure. And teacher responses.
Cool. And then second one, just kind of more of an interest, why grades 3 through 5? That's an indicator.
Because at this point, when we think of, this is typically focused on our secondary students. And so our elementary students, we want to develop this. And so talking with them and seeing where their interests lie.
I love the inclusion of elementary.
OE 11.5, the superintendent will encourage new and innovative programs and regularly evaluate and modify all instructional programs as necessary to assure their continuing effectiveness. And so with this, we have three definitions of terms that we're going to introduce. They're the last three. New and innovative shall mean programs in existing schools that are aligned to the board's student results policy and provide alternatives to traditional school structures and models. Regularly evaluative shall mean systematic review and data analysis to evaluate every new program implementation by the end of the first year. Rigorous instructional design and delivery to ensure students are not only successful on standardized assessments, but also engage in higher order thinking and application to real world situations. And then education terms, programs, a sequence of courses and experiences that lead to a defined purpose or outcome. And so the indicator for this would include all proposals for new and innovative programs will include an evaluation process aligned to the results policies. And then OE 11.6, the superintendent will monitor and control student access and utilization of electronically available information. And so with this, we have one new term for this policy, and that is actually two. I apologize. Control. It's the first bullet point. Control shall mean to have direct influence over access. And then monitor. Monitor shall mean to watch, keep track of, check regularly for a specific purpose. And this indicator states 100% of our families submit the acceptable use policy agreement.
That's part of the registration process. That agreement.
And that is. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, is that agreement specific to while the student is just on school grounds or while they're using any of our technology?
Any of our technology. So at our last board meeting, we spoke to you about OE.10.6.
Yep.
And so we specifically leaned into how that works, meaning it's any and all, especially if it could pose a disruption to the learning environment. OE 11.7, the superintendent will protect the instructional time provided for students during the academic day by prohibiting unnecessary interruptions or intrusions. And so with this, we have a few new terms that we're introducing. Protect shall mean prioritize. Prohibiting shall mean limit to the extent possible. Representative, we spoke of that, an approach that proportionately reflects the background, cultures, identities of students, families, in our community. And let me take a step back. Interruptions or intrusions shall mean disruptions to learning. Indicator 1, elementary, middle, and high school students will reflect instructional hour offerings of at least a district-wide average of 1,080 hours in grades 9 to 12, and at least a district-wide average of 1,000 hours in grades 1 through 8 are provided to all students. The district calendar will reflect a minimum of 180 school days available to students each school year. Let me just add, we realize that there are some things that have to happen in the school day. So at the opening of this meeting, we talked about safety and security. So there are some interruptions that we have to prioritize because they are a must. We have to do safety drills. We have to do those kind of things to keep our children safe. However, the goal is to minimize any other types of interruptions that don't directly align to helping our students perform and achieve.
I have a question on this one as well. So for interruptions, the definition says disruptions to learning. Does that doesn't include student behavior that's covered under OE 10? Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay. That's another question.
Can I just ask how did you get to the numbers, the 1,080 and the 1,000? Is that based in something like a statewide?
The DPI guidelines.
Okay. Yep.
Board, is there any additional questions that we have for administrators? Okay, so the board has received and discussed the superintendent's interpretation and indicators for policy OE 11. I'll now accept a motion to accept the interpretations and indicators as presented so we can begin the board's discussion.
So moved.
I have a motion from John,
Second.
second from Joe. Never mind, I always want to go right there. The board, yes, it is. Thank you. The board can now begin our discussion of the OE 11. Let's start at the top and we can go through as we have in the past. Are there any concerns about the interpretation, the overall interpretation from the board? Questions or concerns about 11.1? $11.2.
At some point, I've just got to make this comment, so I might as well just go now. A lot of these indicators feel very processy to me. I'm taking this again as indication that we're creating a baseline because a lot of these are tied to the legal standard, aren't necessarily the questions that I'm going to want to ask next year about how we're taking that next step. So I'm like physically struggling to bite my lip on some of these because I know that they're necessary, but I'm very anxious to move on. So I'm just saying that now. I think on 11.1, particular around IEPs having a tiered service delivery model, for me, it's like yes, and is what and then on the last one, when we're talking about instructional hours, it's like yes, and what are we doing in addition to that? So I'll just highlight those two now and be done.
Yeah, thank you. I think the capacity building, continues to be an important call out that the board, is recognizing, and something that we want to also make sure that we are able to revisit on an ongoing basis.
Mhm.
Sure.
Sure.
I'm just going to add to John's comment because I had the same struggle in it. I'm going to express it in a different way. I just felt like the emphasis on process, right, was hard for me to take as well, although I realized we have to have a baseline, a starting point, especially when I was reading, like just in this example, but it was in different parts of this document, like 11.1, where it says instructional programs accommodate the different needs, abilities, interests, and personal goals of individual students. And then when I get down to indicator, that we will have a course guide outlining academic opportunities. I struggled with, okay, is having a course guide enough to connect back to the fact that this will somehow meet the needs, abilities, interests, and personal goals? It just seemed, and I understand that we need this basis or baseline, but it just seemed so elementary or simple to have a course guide and didn't for me make the connection of how we make sure what's offered in that actually gets at meeting all the different abilities and interests and all of that. So it may be the same, just expressed in a different way, that I have to settle for like a baseline before you get to the next iteration of, do these courses actually offer enough breadth or depth to actually meet this, what the intention of this statement is? That's the struggle I'm having internally.
I think in this one in particular, I'm curious next year to read these indicators alongside the culture and climate survey in regards to how students, parents, and staff feel like we are providing challenging opportunities, as we saw in some of the data tonight, for the various students groups that they focused on. I think reading that data along with this might give us some more questions for ways we can go with it. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so I was struggling with it too. If we're defining secondary as not just high school, right? So it's not just 9 to 12. I kept checking myself, okay, this means middle and high school. And having had students in both the grade bands, I know there's obviously many more opportunities for course selection in high school than there is in middle school, for example. And so I kept coming back to that, like, are we really offering enough breadth and depth in course at middle school, for example? Because a common complaint from parents, for example, and I know you all heard this, is like math. Is there enough differentiation in math? Is there enough acceleration? Does it actually meet? So it's just still circling in my mind, like sometime down the road, like the climate data might show us that people feel like there isn't enough. And so this is a baseline, but there'll be other iterations of this in the future.
Okay, so we're going to move on to 11.3. I think some of those comments are going to transcend throughout. These are always just as a function of where we're at process-wise. 11. Oh, sorry, John.
I'm sorry, this question might be misplaced. I wonder if either Dr. Clardy, if you could comment on how you see 11.3 relating to 11.7. Because often like over assessing can be considered a disruption to learn. Maybe that's my own misguided opinion, but I was just wondering if you could comment on that. I realized I should have probably asked this question earlier.
So it's a mindset of how we have to think about assessments now. Okay, if you're thinking about, and just having worked with you for a while, I think the concern we can say is standardized testing and overuse of standardized testing to and how that type of testing takes away from what you call traditional instructional time. Okay, where we're referring to is the ongoing more informal assessment of students that actually guides the next teacher move as part of our continuous improvement, not the standardized test, knowing that we will do the state mandated test and we will do the board approved STAR, because that was the assessment that the board chose for our policies, but we will not be a test for the state testing type district. We will use the word, I don't want to get the words assessment and testing too mixed up. Assessment is how we continually monitor student progress and how that informs the next teacher move.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, let's look at 11.4. Are there any questions on the board? .5. 0.6. 0.7.
I just had a comment on this one. This was the only one that kind of flagged in my head, the reasonableness standard, just because I'm not sure those indicators get at all what the OE is about, which is about preventing or prohibiting interruptions, not we'll have the state required scheduled instruction time. But at the same time, as I was thinking that, I'm trying to think how I would change it, and I can't come up with anything. So I guess it's better than nothing at all. And I guess it's reasonable. I just want to throw that out there.
I had the same quandary, and that's why I asked the question about student behavior, because I was like, one way you measure it is like other unintended student behavior, but that's in a different OE. So like, I also don't know what else you would add to that.
We actually had the same discussion
Okay.
as the board, and we felt by adding additional indicators, we were actually doing OE10 over again.
Right.
And exactly. So if we hit the mark in OE10, OE11.7 comes to life. But your question is really important. We're asking ourselves the same thing about protecting the actual opportunity, both instruction and learning. So both that.
I would say that this is a question of the board actually draft an OE that is what we want to draft. I mean, I'm not saying more. This is one that I would personally like to flag as, let's revisit this with some language that actually has more meaning.
I would agree.
Because we as a board can't say what we would actually like to see, then maybe we didn't do a great job with this policy. I mean, but the fact that we did do all of these policies in one sitting, I'm gonna give us a little grace. But I think this is where it's kind of comes to the top.
I think that's fair. We should take a note of that,
Uh-huh.
like,
Policy language review
Yeah.
on that one specifically. What exactly does the board intend? And if we can't articulate it better, then we can.
We'll take it. Rihanna, when we put OE 11 in the folder, please highlight 11.7 at the top, put that in yellow for board review before it circles back to next year.
Yeah, if we can add that as a note on the cover sheet under the summary of board, I think that'll help us all remember that we actually want to look at this. Because otherwise, I'm afraid we'll be having the same conversation in a year. And we're like, man, this language doesn't make any sense. Did we ever notice that? We should probably remember we did.
Instead, we'll be saying, we flagged this. Why did we flag this?
So actually, my next step was, can you take Joe's and Nicole's question and just put it in the sub notes next to it so we remember why we flagged it. Can I just to push back a little bit, this one seemed kind of clear to me because I recalled when we were talking about this, having a memory of having a kindergarten teacher present when I was on the government council at the charter school, that they had to get through, I think it was 12 different assessments over the course of the year between PALS and STAR and state testing and benchmark, whatever they do. And to do that one-on-one with each of the 22 kids in their class took a lot of instructional time. Hence my question earlier about how this might come into conflict with testing. That being said, I think that when we're talking about like, how would you show this or monitor this? I feel like we saw it a little bit earlier when we were talking about security, and it was like, look, we could do a lot more of these tests, but we feel that 2 a year, because they are anxiety producing and they are disruptive to the day, seeing that process of like, we are limiting this because we value instructional time. That is what I want to see here, that like, okay, where are we reining in this impulse to do all these other things that we need to do? We need to do assessments regularly. We need to do safety drills, fire drills, tornado drills, all those sorts of drills regularly. But how do we keep that, how do we get to the top of the bell curve in terms of the benefit there? I think that's for me what this one's about. So I agree, we look at it again, but that's my pushback, that I feel like it's there for a reason. So.
Thank you. Okay, so we've gone through, at this point, we have a motion to approve the indicators as presented. And if we're ready to take a vote, all in favor of approving we already have a motion. All in favor? This is why we have that 2.5 hour.
I know, that's a long time.
I apologize, administrators. I apologize that we are still here. All in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Indicators and interpretations are accepted as approved. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, team. Thank you, academic services team. Well done. I do have I think, for goodness, I think we've seen the superintendent report. Yes. Yeah. Well, not technically no, because you voted, so that was board action, so no, we're not. I do have a question, and I'll front load this. If you answer it the right way, we're completely done with OEs. But OE1 is a statement, like a global statement, but it doesn't have any sections to it. So do you want a sheet for OE1, or do we want to begin with OE2? Because OE2 is the first one we sent for as a monitorable.
I think that telling you it's just the end of the night. That one, I mean, I think it kind of goes without saying, like, we should do these things. Do we take a look at OE1?
Yeah.
Just looking at it, it looks like there's a lot of terms that maybe could use some definition or at least interpretation of how you're interpreting those terms.
The definition.
And I think if anything, it should be there just as a, because this forms part of the assessment or your assessment, so we want to make sure that we are giving you credit for all of these things. So
Alright.
I don't know that it needs to be a,
So in that case, we would need, it wasn't on the original calendar that we built as a board.
good.
I think
Did a good job.
I'm interpreting this as like where everything accumulates, like your, you know, the superintendent's review, whatever, like kind of this just falls in there because like everything that follows OE1 kind of accumulates up to this. in some way. So I don't need any more. But
You are like the memory of our board workshop last year, because I do think we didn't include it on the calendar for a reason,
yeah,
because it is encapsulated throughout.
I didn't even know I was remembering that.
Well, it was that and the Aspen, our support from the Aspen group, they purposely did not put it on the calendar because the definitions actually live in each of the.
It's their definitions.
Okay, so then going back to that, I think we're good with this.
If they're defined elsewhere, yeah.
And it feels nice to say we're done with those.
Right, so that will complete all of our OEs, and we have 2 results policies left. All right, 2. So,
Okay.
well done, board.
Okay, well, okay, is there any public comment at this point? Pardon me?
Never mind.
Okay, superintendent's consent agenda. Are there any questions? Concerns? Hearing none, superintendent's consent agenda is approved. Board consent agenda, are there any questions or concerns?
I just had a quick question, and it kind of goes back to what we were just discussing. When we say like, hey, let's document this and make sure we don't forget to talk about it, it never shows up in the meeting minutes. Is that of concern to anybody else, or is it just on the cover letter is the right place for that to live? And do we get updated? Like, will we get all of those notes when we come to review them?
So all the OEs live in, there's an OE folder, and as soon as we dispose of it here, dispose is not the right word. As soon as we take care of it here, it goes into the folder, and if there's any corrections, so for instance, on OE10, there were the 2 words that we wanted to add, and that becomes reflected. So I feel we're probably better off adding in the notes as well. So we just make that a practice.
Yeah, because I think, Joe, I was thinking you had made a comment at the last meeting. I'm like, of course we're not going to forget it. So I've completely forgotten it. And I do think that's where we do need to make sure it's captured in like the summary statement motion of the board section, because I'm, like I said, summary. So Nicole, thank you for bringing that up. Because I know we also don't have necessarily a record on this of what the votes were, and I want to make sure we're keeping track of that. So thank you for bringing that up. And Joe, if you could just make sure. You may have to remember what you didn't want to forget.
No, I gotta.
Sir, to me, it was John, actually. I don't see now, I'm not even sure. Okay.
No, I remember saying it. I just don't
Okay.
remember what I was saying about.
it's hard because me and Joe look alike.
Somebody brought it up. Future agenda items. Let's keep in mind, we have convocation on August 25th, 9 a.m. If you guys are going, we can touch base, please, after this. And we have our board data retreat on August 29th at 5. For that. And then we have our regular meetings. Our next regular meeting is September 12th. So moving forward from there. With that, I'm going to adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin statute 19.85 sub 1 sub C to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and under Wisconsin statute 19.85 sub 1 sub F to consider financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems or the investigation or charges against specific persons, except where paragraph B applies, which if discussed in public would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data or involved in such problems or investigations regarding people expulsion hearings. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion from John, a second from Joe. All in favor signify with aye.
I,
Aye.
Any opposed?